But what has been happening in Auckland, and we've talked to him about it before, but I want to see how it's progressing. Of course, there is a major cost-cutting exercise by the council in Auckland. Fiscal responsibility is the order of the day, and there are some interesting things that have been highlighted as part of that process. One of the councillors intimately involved in that process is former National Party Cabinet Minister, now Auckland Councillor Maurice Williamson, and he joins us on the line now. Maurice, how are you?
Good morning, Sean. I'm very well.
All right, look, the one that grabbed the headlines for me, the cost-cutting, was you've basically said to a whole lot of entities, geez, your offices are quite flash, they don't need to be that flash. How much money do you save by cutting your cloth sort of office-wise or accommodation-wise?
I guess the point I really want to get over is there are two completely separate exercises. One is just this budget. This budget is just for the coming year.
Yep.
But the real big work that follows straight after that is what's called the long-term plan, and that is the whole structural basis for what the local government of Auckland will look like. Now, you cannot make changes to the annual budget, which is just this 1 year thing. That's not consistent with what the long-term plan is. So we're constrained with certain things that we can do now, and Mayor Brown is trying to do everything we can within those constraints. But the real big work will follow immediately on after we've done this budget. We have to then do a major review of the long-term plan, which sets the whole guardrails and guidelines for things that we can and can't do. But in the meantime, we've given very strict instructions to a whole lot of the CCOs, the council-controlled organisations, and I always laugh at that statement because we have quite a little amount of control over a lot of what they do. But we've got the purse strings, and we can use those to say, well, you better start to rein in your spending, to tighten your belt, to start thinking about, do you need to have the flashiest digs in town, or are there other office buildings elsewhere that you
What
can
sort of
appropriately
proportionate saving can you make, though? How different is it for being in a flash glass-fronted building at the Viaduct and then somewhere further in town or at Newmarket or something?
It's not really possible to answer that until you work out what the alternatives are. We still own some heritage sort of office space from the old 7 councils, and some of that is empty. And when I know that Vodafone, that were in that beautiful big glass mansion down at the Viaduct, said they were moving out because it was too expensive, it doesn't seem right that we are using space like that when there is alternative office space. Some of it we still own from Manukau City days and from Waitakere City days and North Shore City Council. So the Mayor's putting that sort of, pressure back on everybody to go back to basics, look at the books, find out, do you need that much floor space to start with? Because floor space is diminished for sort of most
What was
big
the
companies
Maori
out there.
entity that was down at the Viaduct that I saw in the newspapers? What was it called?
It's called the Independent Maori Statutory Board, which sort of has a group of representatives from Maoridom who are able to sit on council committees and vote actually on a number of issues as we go through.
They're part of co-governance, are they?
Well, it's sort of it's a Maori input process. It's been put under statute, so it was in the law, and they sit there. But again, I would question whether they need to be in buildings that are down in the most prime real estate of New Zealand. I mean, I don't even think the council needs to be in the big building we're in. They spend a fortune on this huge big tower, which used to be housing the ASB, and I think that the council could easily be in digs further out of town where parking and costs are a lot less, and in using some of the office space in a better way. So that work's going on. It's not easy. If you've got contracts, it can be expensive to break that contract, or at least, run it out till the end of that contract, but not renew. So there's so many moving parts to this issue. There is just moving parts everywhere, and Mayor Brown is trying to move as many bits and pieces of the jigsaw as he can at one time.
Yeah. How much saving did you find out of the road cones in the end?
I don't think road cones I don't think it was savings that was driving the mayor on that. Road cone savings is quite small. It was more the disruption and the fact that people couldn't move anywhere, couldn't go anywhere. Every time there's a little event around town now, like in my electorate out here, if you're going to be changing a building site's fence or something, you have to have road cones all the way down the street in either direction and feeder streets and so on. And I think a lot of people have just said, this is just really nonsense. It's safety. I think Mayor Brown uses the right expression. When I appointed him to the Land Transport Safety Authority back in the 90s, I sort of ingrained into him then that our motto here is safety at reasonable cost, not safety at any cost. And we're getting that now. And Brown's saying back to AT, you do not need to be disrupting the traffic this much. There do not need to be road cones to Africa that block and stop and do everything to make sure people can't move around the town. And I can see already there are signs that is being reined in and being more sensible in its use.
All right. Well, talking about sensible spending, how many people have gone with the mayor to South Korea and why?
One councillor, Richard Hills from the North Shore, it's to an environment conference. The first point that's really important to make, because this is the one I jumped on straight away when I heard about it, is this is not a good look when we're trying to cut the budget. And the answer was there is no cost to us. The organisers of the conference put the invitation. They're paying for airfares, hotel bills, and even food.
Sounds corrupt. Sounds corrupt to me, Maurice. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
No, I don't. I think it's just to do with discussing, the future of climate change
and how much carbon do you think was spent flying two people all the way to South Korea for that?
Yeah, I know. I think that's always the funniest part about this debate. I know that when Joe Biden went to Scotland to talk about, the planet and saving it, there were 56 aeroplanes involved, 6 of them big starlifters to move all of his safety cars, and there were 54 cars in the line that drove from the airport to it. And there was enough bloody carbon release for a sort of a small country for 6 months. But he was going there to talk about how we need to save the planet. But look, so I'm the last person to talk about that. But look, the mayor has. I don't think it's a big issue. It's only a few days he's away. He's done all the groundwork for what councillors need to make the decision on, and it's not costing the ratepayers 1 cent.
Okay. Is there anything, and as you said, there are two processes here, and it sounds to me one is the nuts and bolts of this year's finances, this year's budget, and the other is really, in some ways, Maurice, a culture change, or the desire to have a culture change to get rid of profligate spending.
Yes, you've got it in one, Sean, and there's a few things about local government and the Local Government Act I would hope that any incoming central government would look to change. One of them was we have to consult so widely on everything we do, and if we haven't consulted extensively on it, we can't do it. Now, everyone keeps saying to me, it's wrong that you're saying we shouldn't be doing that. But Grant Robertson doesn't even consult his backbenchers. When he produces a budget, the backbenchers get put into the caucus lockup at 1 o'clock on the Thursday, and they get told this is what's going to be announced in an hour's time. But we've got to go out with an incredible formal consultation process. You then create unfulfilled expectations, because when people respond to these consultations, they say, we don't want you to do this, and we want more of this, and we need more of that. And the problem is, under the heading of everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. They want more of this, they want more of this, they want more of this, but they don't want the rates to go up. That's the first problem we've got. The second problem is when you have to do these long-term plans, they become almost a straitjacket. And if in the annual budget, like we're doing now, you want to do something that's outside of the long-term plan, you're restricted or you can't. And the officials come back and say, well, you can't actually do that because the long-term plan hasn't set that in place. So there will be a major culture change at Auckland Council when the long-term plan is done. I can tell you that is Mayor Brown's biggest imperative, to get that culture change about sort of breaking down the spending monster, living within our means, retiring some debt, reducing the size of council, reducing its footprint in terms of building space and so on. That's a much bigger piece of work to follow, but now we've got to try and shoehorn ourselves into an annual budget within those constraints.
All right. What is the thing through the annual budget process that the Aucklander in the street is going to notice most? What is the one thing they might lose that they will miss?
Well, I think what Mayor Brown has said recently is that he's listened clearly to some of those, what I consider to be reasonably small sums of money, like $3 million for Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, I think long-term, Citizens Advice Bureau is something central government should be funding because the vast bulk of the work they handle is to do with either immigration or IRD or whatever, or police matters. So I just don't think it's a local body matter. But Mayor Brown said in a statement to us the other day, he's heard some of those concerns, and in the short-term annual plan, he's prepared to put some of that back into the budget, put the small bits back. The big one by far is the airport share sales. If we've got $2.3 billion and we're a passive investor in a asset that is not even returning enough to cover the cost of that debt, his view is we sell those shares, we retire that $2.3 billion of debt off the 11.9. I know it was 11.7.
Yeah, 11.7.
Last time I talked to you, it's up to 11.9 billion in the latest briefing.
Yeah.
So that's the biggie. That will be the biggest one ever. The thing that we want Aucklanders not to notice in this budget is a big rate increase. We want to keep it with sort of inflation as the sort of the benchmark. If we can stay within inflation, either inflation or slightly lower, which is 7 point whatever, you can argue currently 7.4 or 7.6 or whatever. But if rates were to go up into the 13s or the 14s or the 15s, there'll be just such outrage from Aucklanders, especially those on fixed incomes, and especially those people who are working third jobs to try and even put food on the table.
Yeah, Maurice,
so he's hell-bent, and so am I, on making sure we make sure that rate increase is no more than the rate of inflation.
Yeah. Maurice, while I've got you here, and it's not strictly what we were going to talk about, I've been trying to explain to people, and if they're listening to the current crop of political reporters about leadership polling, I've always worked on the adage and the rule of thumb that you give an incumbent Prime Minister, they get an extra 9 points from incumbency when it comes to preferred Prime Minister polling. Is that your understanding also?
I actually would have a slightly higher number, but you're dead right. I mean, there are times when somebody's almost polling nothing, they're nothing. A week later, they become the Prime Minister, and they've leapt to 35%. And you go, that's because they're the incumbent Prime Minister, and there
it's
are people that will just give... It is. And what's hilarious is that after one of them goes, after John Key went or after Jacinda Ardern went, they stay in those preferred polls for some time because people remember their name as being it. So there is an incumbency factor. And the best one ever was Helen Clark. She was polling so poorly in the 90s. Absolutely appalling. I think Johnny Bass used to call her Mrs. 2%. And he used to get up in the House and refer to Mrs. 2%. Well, she became the Prime Minister in 99 and suddenly had a huge polling as preferred Prime Minister. So there is a massive dollop that just sits with the incumbent, and whoever that will be, if it turns out to be, Honi Harawira in 3 years' time, then he will get a big dollop because he'll be the preferred Prime Minister.
All right. I just wanted someone to back me up on that because a few people sceptical about my claims.
No. You're right. I've got some pretty good analysis which would suggest that you're slightly short. I've got it at around 12.
Okay. Well, in any case, that would mean Chris Hipkins under-polling Luxon as preferred Prime Minister if we factor that into current polling.
Hipkins should have that big dollop of poll simply by holding the position of Prime Minister. And it will switch around. If there's a change of government at the next election, you just watch it within the next polling. Whoever is the current Prime Minister will pick up that sort of big chunk of weight that hangs with the job and goes again very quickly once you're not it. And you saw that happen. Jacinda Ardern, polling here, bang, gone. And similarly, people that aren't even in the race will sometimes, because of their name recognition, get reported on.
Yeah, good on you, Maurice. I thank you for your time this morning. Maurice Williamson, Auckland councillor, the guy who kind of wields the budgetary scalpel for Wayne Brown, by the looks of it.